Okay, Craig, if you'd like to start, thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Well, look, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this inaugural lecture this afternoon by our Provost and Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Dr. Lucy Meredith. Before I give you a brief précis of her career, let me just welcome a number of guests who are here this afternoon. We've got quite a cadre of people who have joined us this afternoon. You're all very welcome. But can I say a warm welcome to Lucy's mum, Alex Wormsley, to her auntie Caroline Berry, and presumably her sister Elizabeth Downs, who are all joining this afternoon as well. You're all very welcome. I'm sorry that we're not hosting this physically where you would have been invited to the university. Now, before Lucy begins her inaugural lecture, let's just have a very quick potted history of her career to date. For more than 28 years, Lucy's been working in higher education, but of course she is more than merely an academic and a Provost and Deputy Vice-Chancellor. In the course of her career, she completed a BSc in Environmental Health from the University of Salford, after which she then became an Environmental Health Officer. Later followed from that was a degree, an MSc in Tropical Public Health Engineering from the University of Leeds. And then she became a lecturer in environmental health at Bristol Polytechnic, now the University of the West of England. That was back in 19... Hello. Can you still hear me, Alison?
We can, yes.
Right, so just my screen went blank all of a sudden. Lucy's PhD was in consumer causes of food poisoning. I'm sure at some stage she'll talk to us a little bit about that, but that's highly relevant to Paisley, where there is a very famous law case here of the snail in the bottom. But of course, in addition to being an academic, Lucy has had many career positions. Prior to joining the University of the West of Scotland, she was the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the Rural Agricultural University. But in addition to being an academic, she's also an explorer, a mother of two, a keen canoeist, skier, sailor, and mountaineer. But what we're going to hear about today is Lucy's academic career journey and the way in which she became the successful individual that she is. So without further ado, going to hand over to you now, Lucy, for your inaugural lecture.
Okay, thanks, Craig. I'm just going to take a minute to share screen, if that's okay. Okay, can we all see that? Yeah, okay, I think it's shared. So I'll start. So thanks, Craig, for that kind introduction. And also to those of you that have given up.
Shared, yeah.
Thanks. And also those of you that have given up an hour of your time to listen to me. We normally start these things with a reception, which includes wine and nibbles. So please feel free to pour yourself a large one. I know it's a bit early for some people, but I know there's certainly some in the room who've probably done that already, and you know who you are. So it's a little over 12 months since I started here as an interim with a very clear brief to look at National Student Survey action planning, because we weren't doing too well, organised start of the year, and basically clear the decks for the person who's going to be appointed to the permanent post as Vice Principal Learning and Teaching. And hopefully I've done that, Jonathan. I do believe he's in the room today. Now, as we all experienced, that didn't quite go to plan because kind of COVID got in the way. So I'm still here in a permanent job and things are beginning to feel very sticky. And for me, that's a really good thing. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about my life, how I got to where I am, and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. So recently, I was asked to talk to a group about what was the recipe to success. What was the recipe for a successful career in higher education, particularly in relation to leadership? And I reflected that at the end of the day, success is a bit of a self-referent thing, and it's really been about being proud and happy in what you do. And it doesn't matter if you're a lecturer, senior lecturer, professor, dean, Vice-Chancellor or whatever, as long as you're happy and proud of what you do, that's really a measure of being successful. But at the end of the day, I was asked to think about some of the skills, attributes and experiences that are really important. And I think these are some of them. And I'm not really going to go through them, but I will refer to them as I kind of go along through this lecture. All I can say is that if success is about achieving a senior post in higher education, then as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't necessarily planned. And I know a lot of people will start as a lecturer and say, you know what, in 20 years' time, I'm going to become a Vice-Chancellor. That wasn't me. And the reason I can honestly say that is because when I started work at 28, I was quite a young lecturer at Bristol Polytechnic in a Department of Applied Sciences that was mainly full of men in their 50s. I think there were only 3 other women there. I decided to look at my pension because I'd had too much fun prior to starting that job, and thought I'd better be very sensible at this point, start paying into a pension and see what it looks like by the time I was 60. So I did that. I decided that on the projection, it was never going to be enough for me to have the fun that I wanted at 60. So I started to pay AVCs. I made the assumption I'd get to the top of the senior lecturer scale. I never thought that I'd be sitting here today. So there are definitely some skills, attributes and opportunities and experiences that have helped me along the way. And some of you in the room, you will know from experience, if I say I've got a really good idea, you run for the hills, you absolutely do. But you've also got to remember, and some of you know this, that I'm pretty good on a hill. So I'm going to refer to some of those things in the course of this talk. But everyone has to start somewhere, and this is where I started. And this is a picture of me and my family in Clitheroe, which is the place that I was brought up. Now, Clitheroe, for those of you that don't know, it's a market town in northwest Lancashire. And one thing that's important to realise is that often people who are born in Clitheroe don't often stray too far. And that's not really a bad thing, because actually it's quite a nice place to live. So there's a picture of me on the left-hand side here. That's me and my family. So it's me, my mum and dad, one of my brothers and my sister, along with my cousins. On the right-hand side, there's a picture, an L.S. Lowry picture of Moor Lane. And that's the street where my dad had his shop, and we lived for most of our life under the age of 18. If you're interested in who's me on the picture, it's the one with the red circle around the head. And that was because I was clinging to my grandma, because she was my grandma and she was not going to belong to anybody else on that picture. And I was very attached to her for a number of years until she died. So for the first 4 years of my life, I lived at home with my mum and dad, brother, sister, supported by grandparents, aunties, uncles and cousins, and didn't really come into contact with many other kids because we didn't need to, because there's quite a lot of us. The one thing I did notice though pretty quickly, that there were kids walking along the street to school, and I wanted to be one of those kids walking along to the street to school, because my games of playing school teacher with my sister Elizabeth were wearing a little bit thin. I think she was a bit fed up with it, to be honest. So really, as far as she was concerned, the sooner I got to school, the better. So I'm going to talk a little bit about school, because school's very important, particularly those early years. So on school, interestingly, it wasn't quite what I expected on the first day, because I thought it would be like being at home where everybody was really nice to you, and if they weren't nice to you, your mum or your dad would interject and tell people to, you know, clear off. But it wasn't like that at all. On my first day, I remember having to sit next to this boy who broke my crayons in half. A brand new pack of crayons. Brand new packs of crayons are quite a thing there. And what did he do? He went and broke them down. I also realised that I ate really slowly, and so that whereas most kids finished their lunch in about 30 minutes, it took me about an hour and a quarter to begin with, so I missed out at playtime. I also worked out that there was classroom politics and playground politics that I kind of had to get used to. So after I'd kind of calmed down a little bit, I realised that at school, some people are more equal than others. And in Clitheroe in the 60s, you know, you're either a boy or a girl, you're black or you're white, although mainly white, it has to be said, Catholic or Protestant, Conservative or Labour. What I also realised is that the boys in my class, 5 or 6 of them, regularly being taken off to do different things. So different maths, different reading and everything else. And I decided that I probably wanted to have a go at the special things that the boys were doing, and quite precociously perhaps went to the reception teacher and said, why are the boys doing different things? I want to do that. And to be fair to Miss Carter, who was an amazing teacher, she said, well, you show me that you can do it and you can do it. But you know, what a thing. The boys were already doing different things than the girls in reception at school. So off the back of that, I am passionate about equality and diversity, and I do believe that people should all have equal opportunity. It was also at school that I first came across bullies, and bullies are interesting. I was never somebody that was bullied, and neither was I a bully, but I experienced people around me who were. I think I got away with it because I got quite sharp tongue. I spent a lot of time at primary school using that sharp tongue to deflect the bullies and also in defence of others. What I also realised really quickly was that I had a good brain between my ears, and that's quite handy when you're in school. And that set me on a really nice track, actually, heading for 11 plus, and then after that to Notre Dame Grammar School, which was in Blackburn. So I was very privileged to go there. I'm also going to talk about role models, and I think we have role models throughout our life. We have the people that we take from because we're inspired by them, and there are the people that I class as negative role models who we look at and we say, I'm never going to be like that, and I'm never going to do that if I'm in a position of leadership. So my first role model was my cousin Janet, and that's not Janet, that's me. That's me with my purdy cut, and you might think that actually Joanna Lumley, who was in the New Avengers at the time with that haircut, was a role model. Well, she was as far as my hair was concerned, but not as far as anything else. So when I was 7, my cousin Janet, who was 7 years older than me, got her Queen's Guide. That was a real big thing in those days. I don't even know if the Queen's Guide exists, but I sat there as a 7-year-old and thought, you know what? I absolutely want to be like her. And I couldn't wait to get to guides. The whole brownie thing was fine, to be honest, but getting to guides and getting all those badges for the Queen Guides was where I was heading. So that's a picture of me when I was probably 13, just before I got my Queen's Guide with my best friend Wendy, who I also think is listening today. Other people who had a lot to do with my life was an absolutely amazing teacher called Miss Moss, who was at Notre Dame. She was the sort of teacher who just expected the best out of everybody, and the best she got. She's probably the only teacher I know where there were 25 girls who all got a grade A in O-level history, and that was really because of her inspirational teaching. I've got to mention some other people as well. As you can see, I love being in guides, and guides and scouts in Clitheroe was absolutely fantastic. And it was fantastic because of 4 people, Joe and Theo Wilson and Joan Lee. And they were people who just provided hundreds of children with opportunities outside school to do things that ordinarily we wouldn't have been able to afford to do. So canoeing, so walking, so camping, a whole load of things. So, you know, I'm hugely indebted to all of those people for really helping me to be something other than somebody who was just good at things at school. I'll also mention a few other people. I have to mention for Chris Miller, Professor Chris Miller, for giving me a kick up the arse when I was having too much fun at Salford University and suggesting that perhaps I could do better. I've got to mention Roger Lewis and Professor Mary Haslam, and perhaps more of them later. So Roger for encouraging me to start my PhD by saying, you know, if you're going to get anywhere in higher education in science, you need a PhD, Lucy. And Professor Mary Haslam for taking on, which was quite a complex PhD because there were mixed methods, and actually probably was responsible for me finishing it. I'll also mention Helen Langton for being the best line manager that an inexperienced head of department could ever wish for, with the caveat that you had to make sure what was on your list of things to do was on hers or else. So I'm going to talk a bit about on goals, getting there and developing new skills. And I think overall, if you want to get where you want to be, you've got to be pretty persistent and pretty resilient. So when I was 13 and experiencing all this wonderful thing in the Girl Guides, I started canoeing, and I was pretty good at it, to be honest, and realised that I wanted my own canoe. And I kind of worked out that if I wanted a canoe, that the 50p a week pocket money wasn't going to get me there. In fact, it would have taken me about 4 years to get the canoe, and then I would have still been up the river without a paddle. So that was a bit of a problem. So at 13, I took myself off to this market stall because I'd seen people working there who I thought were the same age as me, and asked for a job, and so I got a job. So I worked on that market stall for the Burney family on and off for about 8 years, both on the stall and also in the market gardening business. So huge thanks to them for making sure that I got my canoe a little bit quicker. And then I got another job, a warmer job, which was better paid. But in all of that, and importantly, I did develop employability skills, communication skills, and also supported my whitewater racing ambitions. And Wendy will remember the weekly cycle of train, race, bust, mend, and train again. And depending on how bad your boat was broken during that week, and depending where the break was, one of our others would be sent down the boat with some fiberglass and resin on a piece of stick to mend it from the inside. And I have to say that was usually me because I was quite small and skinny at the time. So the point here is actually that I've had quite a few jobs, and mainly they were to fund my life outside work. So every time I needed a bit of extra money, I got a bit of an extra job. So there's a point about being in employment, and actually since being 13, I've only been out of work for 2 months, and that was relatively recently. So what happened next? Well, I got my 10 O levels, that went to plan. I took 3 A levels that didn't go to plan, for which the medical profession should actually be eternally grateful, I think, and decided to go to Salford to study environmental science. I realised that Salford environmental science was pretty different. It was a hugely technical course, which had different routes through it: housing, planning, and environmental health. And as it happened, at the time, there were plenty of jobs, very well paid jobs in environmental health. So most of us opted for the environmental health option. So I'd done all of that other stuff to get in. We'd done Duke of Edinburgh. I was quite proficient at whitewater racing, so my CV was looking pretty good. Towards the end of the first year at Salford, I was either going to have 4 months working as a pool attendant, which is quite lucrative, back in Clitheroe, which seems a little bit dull after having a wild time at Salford, or someone suggested that I apply for a job in the south of France as a canoe instructor, which was definitely not lucrative, but it was great fun. So there I am, aged 19 actually, in the south of France with our river team, who were dubbed the Rebels Without a Buoyancy Aid. And we were stopped from doing that shortly after that, as you can imagine, because it wasn't really a very good example to the clients. So in that boat, at the front, we've got a roofer, there's a scaffolder, the third one was a teacher, the fourth one was a student, Brian was in the British canoe team, and then there was me. Now, going to the south of France was a big deal for me because I've not been north of the Lake District or south of Bristol. So getting on a bus with 25 people I didn't know to a job in a place that was very strange was a little bit challenging at first. But where it took me to was the opportunity to develop a lot of social capital, because I was working with people I'd not experienced before, and people who to this day are actually still some of my good friends. So developing social capital was what I got out of it, became a really good canoe instructor, and also we had quite a bit of fun as well. So arrived back at Salford fashionably late to avoid the registration queue, and went into my second year of study. This is where it starts getting interesting, because it's where you start getting to study applied environmental health. And then someone suggested that there was this thing called Operation Raleigh, and that perhaps because I was a canoe instructor and liked doing quite wild things, that I should apply for it. And so I did, but there was a bit of a problem with this, and that was because it cost kind of £1,400 to do this. And although I was about to go on my placement year, my salary for the year was £2,800, and that kind of was a bit of a difference. So not to be deterred, once I'd done the hard job of getting selected for it, I got another job well, actually I got 2 jobs. One as an usherette in the Odeon Cinema in Liverpool, and one as a waitress. And as a consequence, my environmental health colleagues used to joke, they reckoned that my dad was a mason, as no one in Liverpool had 3 jobs in the 1980s. And just for the record, he wasn't a mason and he didn't live in Liverpool anyway. I think this is a nice picture because we spent 3 months in Chile doing different things, archaeology, adventure and community building. And this little girl used to follow me around. I can't remember her name, which is shocking, but she followed me around for at least 6 weeks of that time. Every time I got up in the morning, she was sitting there. Every time we went anywhere, she was standing there. She didn't call me Lucy, she called me Sheena because one of her friends had told her that I was Sheena Easton. So yeah, so it was very sweet. So I had a marvellous time there. We did all sorts of things. It was the first time I've been on a plane even, and came back into my final year at Salford. So we went through the final year at Salford and we graduated, and I'm still friends with 2 people, Paula and Carol, and from time to time see some of the others. What was interesting about that final year is that we were all incredibly privileged because we all went into final year knowing that we'd got a job to go to. All of us had done a placement and all of us had been successful in securing that job. So I headed off after graduation to Liverpool City Council, where I worked as an environmental health officer. And believe me, I've got many stories I could tell about that, but I won't. And we'd certainly have to do it with Chatham House rules firmly in place. While I was there, I decided that I really wanted to go and travel and trying to combine work and travel. And realised that I was a bit short on some technical aspects of things that are useful for working in public health engineering overseas. So that was easily fixed. That was easily fixed by going and doing an MSc. And at the time there were 2. There's one at Loughborough University and there was one at Leeds. And the slight problem was that back then you couldn't get any funding for MSc study. So you either had to pay for it yourself or you got yourself a scholarship. So I got another job. I got a second part-time job to start to try and save up to get somewhere near these fees. That was going to take quite a long time. But what I also did was systematically apply for scholarships. And eventually, and to be honest, really surprisingly, landed one with Mott Hay and Anderson, who at the time were an engineering consultancy. So studying that MSc was a tremendous privilege, actually, because I was studying with 35 students who really were from all over the world. It was absolutely fantastic. Some of them took a year like me. Some of them whose English wasn't so good spread their study over 2 years. So again, one of the best things that I ever did. It was pretty hard work because I had to learn differential calculus again, and maths wasn't one of my strong points. So got to the end of that and took a temporary job in Bradford, went back to France again, got a little bit distracted in France and decided that it would be a really good idea to cycle around India, having worked for a season as a bar manager. Mott MacDonald's, as you can see, had other ideas and they really wanted me to go and work for them as a graduate engineer. And in spite of me saying to them, look, I don't want to mess you about, I'm off to India for a year, they were still quite interested. As things happened, I never went to work for Mott MacDonald. That was probably an opportunity lost, but having a sort of 6 months cycling around India was also pretty amazing. So I did that until ran out of money and also was too ill actually to cycle any further and decided to come home and got another job back in environmental health. So this is where things start to change, and this is really how I got into higher education. So I was working as a senior environmental health officer in Merseyside, and the reason for that was that I needed a job, and started to do some food hygiene training. And in the start, it was at a very low level, mainly for dinner ladies and some of the meat inspectors that worked for us. After a while, people realised I was quite good at it, so they set me off on the advanced food hygiene training programs, which were really for senior managers, and that led me to do a City and Guilds Further Education Teaching Certificate. So at that point I thought, well, I wonder what it takes to get into a university, how easy it is. And as it happened, it proved quite easy because there were 2 temporary jobs that came up at the time, one at Manchester Poly and one at Bristol Poly. So I applied for them both, got both. I decided that a change of scene was probably a good thing for various reasons and went down to Bristol. And that was a fantastic time, apart from I was by far the youngest person in that faculty for a while. And as I said, there were very few women in there. The good thing about that time was that I started a PhD, and I'm really glad I started that then when my life was less complicated, because to try and do that and juggle that with a family and children would have been nearly impossible. Anyway, things kind of move on, and I then went to Bath Spa, really because I needed some space to finish the PhD, and for various reasons couldn't have done that at West of England. And what I did at Bath Spa was to get a great deal of experience and knowledge around what good teaching and learning looks like and what a good student experience is. I also got the opportunity for subject group leadership in professional and academic development. And the good thing about Bath Spa is they were really supportive of young families. That's me getting my PhD. If you think I'm looking a little bit fat, I was at the time, because I think I was probably 8 months pregnant, and I'm pretty sure it was on my due date, and I know people couldn't wait to get me off the stage. So my PhD was the impact of consumer behaviour as a cause of food poisoning in the home. And you ask, why did you do that? And the simple fact was, most food poisoning occurs in the home and nobody really knows why. Most people blame the last takeaway that they had or the last thing that they ate in a restaurant. I was reflecting earlier that I think there'd be some really interesting projects on the impact of consumer behaviour as a cause of food poisoning in the home over the last 12 months. And it'd be really interesting to look at the figures there. So there were 2 people, as I said, who really helped me. Roger Lewis on getting me started and Mary Haslam for getting me finished. And that was really good advice actually from Roger, because he said, if you want to get anywhere, you absolutely need this for career progression in science. And he was absolutely right. And I do have to thank Bath Spa for the flexibility and creating the space to finish it. So what next? So around that time, I'd missed out on a couple of promotions at Bath Spa for various reasons, and thought, well, I think it's probably time for a move. So I started to look around, and just as I started to look around, a principal lecturer position came up back at University West of England. So I went from a part-time position back to a full-time position. So that was quite a big deal at the time, with 2 small children and one about to start school. And what I did get very quickly was a significant amount of leadership experience. While I was there, it was usual things. Things were restructured, things were regraded, all sorts of things happened. And so I took on various roles, firstly to keep my pay grade, and then secondly to get some more experience. And the Director of Educational Partnerships was a really interesting role with no extra pay, but that ability to get experience and visibility with senior leadership, which is quite important, I think, if you're serious about being promoted. Now, while I was there and during that time, there's something that happened that I'm really proud of. We got lots of experience, but we also got an opportunity to develop a highly innovative programme. And to this day, I'm quite proud of that, because it was a real challenge. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about that. While I was at University West of England, me and some colleagues developed something called an MSc Integrated Professional Development and Environmental Health. And that was just a programme which provided an alternative way for engaging with the work-based learning requirements of the CIEH curriculum. One of the challenges at the time was that if you wanted to become an environmental health officer, an environmental health practitioner, you had to study an accredited programme and you've got to meet certain competencies. And the only way really to develop those competencies was to get a placement. And one of the challenges around 2009 onwards was that the placements had dried up. Local authorities just could not afford to employ people. So we had students starting courses who were never actually going to qualify, and I felt quite bad about that. So unless you were in the bank of mum and dad and you were going to be supported on one of these unpaid placements, there were people who were going into environmental health courses who were never going to have to be able to qualify, and I felt that was really wrong. So we decided to do something about it. So I'm showing this picture because this is where the idea came from, really. The environmental health academics at the West of England used to take these MSc students on a field trip once a year. This one happened to be in the North Lakes in Keswick, and those are the lovely group of students who were on that field trip that year, or most of them. One of the activities that we planned was to go to Centre Parks and to look at Centre Parks from an environmental health perspective. And it's interesting because there's a lot of issues around food hygiene, Legionella in swimming pools, health and safety, disease control, you name it. So it's a really good visit. So we spent a day there, and I was sitting in the pub with my very good friend David Lown with a pint of beer, mulling over the day's events. And David said to me, and this might not be a direct quote, said, "Wouldn't it be good if you could do an environmental health placement at Centre Parks? Because at Centre Parks, there's everything there. There's housing, there's disease control, there's swimming pool, there's food hygiene, there's noise control, there's absolutely everything." To which I reply, "Yeah, but there's only ever take on 2 students a year, and we've got to sort of deal with 30 or 40. And then he just looked at me and said, "Oh no, you've got a bright idea, haven't you?" I'm going, "I have. A university is like a small town, and we can do all this and make it into a course." And that was really where it started. Now, we did have one small stumbling block, and that was the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, who perhaps at that time had quite a traditional way of doing things, but they also had a problem. And I think Tony Lewis is probably in the room listening to this. They had a problem. There were people who'd graduated from environmental health programs but had never qualified. Best guess was about 4,000, and that is shocking. In that year that we were thinking about this, we had 400 graduates coming off accredited degrees each year, and only 145 had registered for CIH in 2010. So as a professional body, they'd got a problem. I saw a bit of an opportunity here, and it happened to coincide with postgraduate funding being made available in the UK. So what did we do? We won an innovation competition, and we got some money. We paid some people to build up some case studies, and we managed to do it in-house. Now, in doing all of that, it took all of these things in this recipe to success, apart from patience, because actually we'd become a little impatient by that point, and we decided that we're actually going to do things quite quickly. So we got the money, and then we started to work with UE academics and technicians in health and applied and social sciences, and the Faculty of Environment and Technology. By this time, David was working at Western College, so we used some of their wonderful facilities. I went to speak to the head of estates at UE and asked for access to kitchens, residences, polluting areas, you name it. And he said to me, "So it's about time you academics came to talk to us to tell us how we help," and he did help. At Western College, we got hairdressers, we'd got engineering labs, we'd got teaching kitchens, so that was all sorted. We'd got a number of visiting qualified environmental health practitioners who were helping us. And importantly, we developed a flipped classroom approach whereby the students did significant learning outside of the time that they were with us, and then when they came in, they simulated events. So they did food hygiene inspections, they did housing inspections, they did water sampling, and where we couldn't do something in practice, what we did was to do it through simulation. The things that we had to do through simulation were things like investigating a fatality or a food poisoning investigation, because clearly we couldn't arrange that. It's not that convenient. And often the first time you do a major food poisoning investigation or investigation a fatality, fortunately, is actually the first time that you have to do it. So all credit to the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health and Tony Lewis. We did have to work through some complexity, but we got there in the end. And I'm very pleased to say that the son almost, or daughter of that programme still exists at Western College, which is the only place where undergraduates can start their environmental health programme and finish it as a qualified environmental health officer, because all of the practical activities are built into it. So you've got to talk about having a family, because having a family and working full-time is quite complex, as you can imagine. And people often say to me, how did you do all of that? Well, I have to say, well, it was pretty busy. So you can have it all, and I've put the ish on the end because there is a big ish there. But what you have to realise is that you can't be perfect, and it is a huge compromise. So I wasn't the person who was in the mummies after school club. The kids did go to school with some weird hairstyles, particularly if Chris was taking them to school. Nicola and Katie were in clubs. They were in the after school club, the before school club, the holiday club, and any other club that was going. And at one point, and I remember it well, I spent more on childcare than I earned. But I think even at that point, I thought there's a bigger picture here, and this won't last forever. And actually, my career is important, as is my family. Now, those are various people in my family, and you can see a picture of mince pies, and that's not really because we're particularly attached to mince pies. It's just a bit of a story about where the compromise comes. So I was the person that when you got the letter home that says, I quote, "Dear parents," which means brackets mummies usually. As you will remember, it's traditional for parents, brackets mummies, to bring mince pies for the post-nativity reception. And yes, it was one of those schools that had a party after the nativity play. And yes, I was a mummy who went to Waitrose, bought the mince pies, guiltily bashed them slightly and sprinkled them with icing sugar to make them look homemade. And they had to be Waitrose ones. You'd never have got away with Sainsbury's ones looking like that. So I wouldn't have missed all that for the world. And I have to say a huge thank to Chris for being at home when I couldn't. He's been absolutely fantastic. And in fact, if he'd not taken a career change 10 years ago, I don't think I'd be sitting here now. And that would have been okay as well. So where did we go after that? So it was around this point in time. I was kind of minding my own business. I've been Director of Educational Partnerships for probably only about 3 months. So I've been quite enjoying that. Minding my own business on a Friday, walking down the corridor, and then I bumped into a chap called David Veal, Dr. David Veal, who's probably also here somewhere. And he said, "You're going to be busy over the weekend, Lucy." I'm going, "No, I'm not. I'm going sailing this weekend." He said, "No, you're going to be busy because you're going to apply to be interim head of school." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure about that." And he said, "Yes, you are. We want you to apply for it." So he was also in contention. And I do believe that I was seriously conned into this by David Veal. And thanks, David, for that, because if I hadn't taken that interim role, I definitely wouldn't have been here today. But also, seriously thanks for support and wise words to the other associate heads at the time. So Lynn Newton, who's now the head of applied sciences, Alina Duran, John Hancock, Viv Rolfe and Carolyn Morton. We were a fantastic team together with that Department of Applied Sciences. Things were great. Everything glows green. We got great NSS results, and I'm sure that things are still going really well. Now, I will share with you something which is quite personal, and it's around tips and leadership and perhaps some of the terrors. So I was appointed interim head of school at the end of December. I was skiing, I think, at the time, and I had 2 weeks before I actually had to start. And I probably didn't sleep for 2 weeks because I was scared stiff. And the terrors, which you can hardly believe now when looking back at some of them, were chairing large meetings. What happened if it all went wrong? Faculty and school forums where you've got to stand up in front of people, and believe me, they did sometimes go wrong. Programme assessment boards where west of England, you would have 60 academics and 15 external examiners in the room. How do you keep control of that? Budgeting when you've no experience of managing a budget. Difficult conversations, making people redundant, work-life balance, too much attention, and I really don't like too much attention. I was pretty scared of the dean as well, and most of the other senior leaders in the university, and I didn't know enough about research. Well, unless you try things, you don't know how you're going to do. Fortunately, it was an interim role, so if that had not gone to plan, I could have stepped back gracefully into programme leadership or subject leadership. However, out of all of that experience and other experience today, I do have some tips for anybody who's kind of serious about going into a senior leadership position. And the first one is do the difficult things. It's all too easy to not tackle things head on, but if you do the difficult things, things will always be better. Have those difficult conversations, and I've had quite a few, and they're never as bad as you think they're going to be. Making sure that you've got really effective communication mechanisms. That's relatively easy as a head of department or a head of school. It's even relatively easy as a dean of faculty, but you get higher up the sort of food chain and it becomes much more challenging. Making sure that you get out of the office or keep your office door open. Be really patient, have a good work head. Build capacity by trusting people. I think it's really important that you do this. You can't do everything yourself, and you've got to give people slack if they make mistakes. There's something about getting visible internally and externally, planning your next move, being prepared to move. You don't have to know everything. If you go for promotion, especially internally, take it seriously and watch your gob. And actually, I do usually watch my gob quite a bit. So that was my leaving day, and then things moved on from there. So I then went to University of South Wales, and the reasons because it was a promotion, it was a challenge, would be part of a senior leadership team, and a former boss was a DVC there. It was quite a challenging place because of budgets. There's no cap on student numbers, so we were fighting for student numbers with many other universities in the area. Work-life balance was becoming a bit more difficult, but there were some definite gains. So good TNE, transnational education experience, and working in a devolved administration. I was then headhunted to go to the Deputy VC at the Royal Agricultural University. That was an interesting experience. It was a promotion. It was a small specialist, and I'd enjoyed working in small specialists before. There's an all-female Vice-Chancellor's executive group, which was an interesting experience. It was challenging because it had lost its small specialist grant. And I can honestly say that by the end of that, I had no work-life balance. And I did know how a university ran because we had to do everything. Had good TNE experience. Between me and Julie Walklin, who's in the room here, we turned our NSS round from being 99th in the country to, I can't remember if it was 9th or 7th, one of the two. So I actually left there and decided to take a short break. Went on the most amazing expedition to Bhutan, and came back and realised that after that wonderful time and a tidy house, I was actually a little bit bored. So I started to look at interim posts, really, because I decided that I was going to have a career as an interim in senior leadership positions. So just so that you know, because I'm here and probably here to stay, I have some likes and dislikes. I like mountains, I like water quite a bit, quite like solutions, quite like bright ideas. I'm starting to really miss my desk in Paisley, to be honest, and missing being on EasyJet flights. So really looking forward to doing that, and hopefully I'll be back with you at the beginning of May. I do have some dislikes. My current dislike is the desk that I'm sitting at now. I'm a little bit fed up of it. Too much attention, that's me having won a trophy, a hideous experience. As you can see, there's another picture of me up a mountain. The reason I dislike that is because I don't know how I got down that mountain that day. So being up a mountain and not knowing how you're going to get down it is never a good place to be. I really dislike too much whinging, and I really dislike people bringing me too many problems without solutions. So we've almost got to near the end of this presentation without mentioning COVID too much, but I think we have to. We should be really proud of ourselves actually this year in what we've done. You know, I came here as an interim with a specific brief, and if I'd turned around to Craig and said, "Oh, Craig, by September, I'd like everybody on hybrid online delivery," he probably, well, he might have said yes actually, but he'd probably have shown me the door. But anyway, we are where we are, and we have delivered on hybrid and online delivery. It's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good compared to what's going on elsewhere in the UK. We have stuck to the budget, and we're looking forward. We're looking forward to achieving our 2025 strategy. And what's that going to look like? Well, we're going to have products and programs which people want to do, are accessible and flexible. We're going to make sure we've got enough students on those programs and extend our reach to the rest of the UK and international. We're going to have an innovative hybrid digital first approach to teaching and learning. The big word for that is pedagogy. We're going to make sure that our students have a great time and that we hang on to them. We're going to ensure that they're going to progress out of here with good degrees and hopefully into a destination of their choosing, all while making sure that what we're doing is practice-based and research-informed. And that's how we're going to achieve it. We're going to achieve that with 6 work streams with executive leads that are going to go live shortly. Currently, at the moment, there's a lot of background work going on to set those up. So this is my ambition for Student Experience 2025. Joined up, not everybody going in the same direction because that's the nature of things, but smooth. I think sometimes at the moment it can feel a little bit like this. So I will say something about hybrid. Hybrid delivery is in our strategy 2025. It's not new. And I think the hybrid genie is here to stay. Not least because there are so many uncertainties about what we are going to go back to in September. It certainly won't be normal, but it's likely to be a new normal. The uncertainties are things like how many people can we have on campus? What social distancing measures will be in place? What will travel restrictions look like? Will international students have to quarantine? What other public health measures are we going to have to put in place? So, you know, it will be prudent to plan for hybrid, again, with this ability to pivot online. One thing is for certain that, you know, COVID is going to be with us for the time being, and we're going to have to learn to live with it. So, being slightly provocative, actually, some of you will have seen certainly the first of these 2 pictures before, and it's often used to make the point that universities have not changed much in 800 years, and that's either because the old ways work well or we're resistant to change. And as you can see, there are similar things going on in both of those pictures. But most recently, we've been challenged by this. And many of our academics have struggled with teaching online, on Zoom or via Teams, where people, within their rights, absolutely choose to switch off their camera. I've done that when I've been sitting in some external events that are not that interesting, so it's not that obvious that I'm actually doing something else. So I have sympathy with those people. So we may be challenged with this, but there's not much difference between that and that. And if anyone's ever, you know, taught a large first-year module, when I was teaching large first-year modules, they weren't all sitting there with Apple Macs, but nevertheless, you're wondering, are they listening to me? Are they on Facebook? Are they triangulating what I'm saying with what is on the internet, which some of them will be doing, and that's how students learn now? Are they watching movies, or heaven help us, are they recording what we're saying and then going to complain to someone about it because they didn't like it? So that's, you know, that can be equally challenging. So we really need to think about doing things differently and giving our students a good reason to come back onto campus. And these might be some of these. So being on campus for good reason and making the most of innovative learning spaces. They may need to come onto campus because it's actually more effective and more fun to do group work face to face. For some, and many of our students, it's about a safe study space. For others, it may be getting together and engaging in problem-based learning with the right sort of equipment and facilities. For others, it might just be about being sociable, and that's great. This is where my slides have stuck. For some, it might be, and by necessity, coming in for laboratories or skills development, or it might be around sports performance. So whatever happens, we are an in-person university, we are an on-campus university, and that is what we will be doing going forward. But what we will be doing is in a really flexible and innovative way. So I'm really proud to be here. We've got a strategy 2025. I'm really proud to be part of that. And I would say that we do just have to go through it and go through it together. And I'm going to finish with two of my favourite quotes, and that is, the first one is by Maya Angelou, who's an amazing author, and that's, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. And I'm sure this next quote is from many people, but it's also a Lucy Meredith quote, and that is that sometimes good is good enough. So thank you all for listening. I've probably spoken too long, but that gives you less time to ask me really difficult questions. So thanks very much for your time, everybody.
Lucy, thank you very much. We've got a few questions coming in, and I'm sure there'll be more as we go through a period of Q&A. I won't submit you to too much of a grilling, but let's have 10 or 15 minutes of questions. You covered a lot of territory, and it was great to get an insight into your career, your experiences that have created the person that you are today. And also enabling us to understand the challenges that you came across during that journey. Let me ask you a simple question though. What advice, you partly covered this on the slide, what advice would you give a young graduate leaving university today, having completed a degree, in terms of their career aspirations?
I would say take a risk and take the opportunity. And even if you feel deeply uncomfortable in taking that risk or opportunity, kind of give it a go. Really give it a go. But you do have to give it a go. And some of these things are really scary. I remember going to my first job in environmental health, and bear in mind, I'd been a student. I sat on the bus thinking, oh my God, it's for real now. I'm not going to be there with somebody who's going to get me out of trouble. I'm going to have to go in there and tell somebody that, you know, their house is unfit for human habitation, and deal with landlords and tell them to fix it. That's pretty scary, actually, if you think about it, in Liverpool when you're 22. So I think you've just got to take the opportunities, even if you don't think that you can do it. You've got to give it a go. And if it doesn't work, you go. There's Plan B. Plan B is always a good thing to have.
Good. I noticed one of your pieces of advice as well was get out of the office, but I think at the moment you've taken that a bit too far. I haven't seen you in the office for nearly a year now, so please do come back. Let's go through some of the questions put on the chat line at the moment. Peter Nguyen says, in your varied career, do you have any regrets?
I have one little one, and I had to fess this up to my mum the other week, actually. So when I had the scholarship with McDonald, they were desperate for me to go and work from them. It was an incredible opportunity, and the graduate scheme, I would have spent, I think it was something like 6 months in Singapore, 6 months in Hong Kong, I think 6 months somewhere else, and I think it was the States. And I decided that actually I was more interested in going and mucking around in the south of France and cycling around India. That was a mistake, and the bigger mistake was coming back and not giving them a call, because I was too proud to do that. So that was a real mistake. So that is a small regret. However, if I'd taken that route, I wouldn't be sitting here now. So Plan B. Okay.
Well, look, the questions are coming in thick and fast. So I just say that to you so that you can decide how long you want to spend answering each one. Sue O'Neill says, "What does success look like for you, Lucy?"
What does it look like for me? I think it's about being happy, and actually it's about finally achieving a work-life balance. I think at times I've not had that, and that isn't success. That in the end makes you pretty miserable. So to get somewhere where you're still working hard, but you achieve a work-life balance, I think that's success for me.
Okay. Ishmael, our president, says, well done, Lucy. You inspire many young folk, including me. That's a lovely comment. Carol McGuinness says, well done, really put your journey over well. Nina Anderson says, Lucy, this has been quite the year for us all. How have you maintained your resilience and drive?
There's something in environmental health training which means that you always see a solution. But I do have to say, in Unable, we're well aware of this. When I'd been up here 4 weeks or something, and all of a sudden we had to flip to hybrid. And she knows, we had a call and said, how the hell are we going to do this? We just had a bit of a moment, don't panic, Mr. Mannering, and then kind of got on with it. And I think we did get on with it. So I think there's always a way through, and sometimes you just have to sleep on it. And I do a lot of sleeping on things. So you can reach the end of the day and an email comes in and you think, oh, how are we going to sort that one out? Usually by the next day, things look pretty different.
Yeah, good. A few comments now. Marla Baird, really enjoyed listening to your journey, Lucy. Thank you. Sarah Boycott, your focus on the importance of the student experience and championing their needs has really come across. Eric Baumgarter, very well done, Lucy. Great lecture and very inspirational. Aritsiyemi Ikomi, well done, illuminating. Walter Patterson says, do you feel that you personally created the conditions that led to your success, or was it just being in the right place at the right time?
So it was not about being in the right place at the right time, but if you're in the right place at the right time and an opportunity comes up and you decide to go for it, you go for it. I mean, those were the kind of successes. There were plenty of other opportunities that you kind of go for and you're not successful, but you kind of learn from them. So no, I don't believe in being in the right place at the right time. There's an element of that, but I think it's about taking opportunity and recognizing you're not going to get what you want all the time and just bouncing back. So plan B. So for all of you that hear, my plan B, if I'm not here in a year's time, is Valley hopped up higher. So you know.
You will be here in a year's time. Joan Lee says, excellent lecture, Lucy. I know that Joe Wilson would have loved to listen to you. Thanks for the invitation. Katrina Bell, thank you, Lucy. A fascinating career journey and really appreciate your honest reflections and advice. Ruth Morse, great lecture. Thanks, Lucy. Best of luck in this new role. Didn't expect to feature in one of your photos. Jonathan Powers, thank you, Lucy. So powerful to hear your honest reflection about leadership and its challenges. Your authenticity is a real inspiration. Looking forward to sharing the next part of the journey. Alicia Harris, very inspirational, Lucy. Thank you for sharing your journey and lessons with us all today. Nina Downs, thanks for sharing your experiences, Lucy, and for your tips and terrors and reflections. Jeannie Stewart, what do you mean by a good work head?
She knows exactly what I mean by a good work head, and she's laughing. I think it's about realising that when you're in work, you are kind of on show, and you do your work colleagues and the people that you line manage. They deserve a degree of patience, actually, and a degree of tolerance. And I have got a pretty good work head. I don't actually think I've ever, well, maybe once or twice, lost it at work. And if I have done, it's pretty much been in private. I mean, I used to share an office with a chap who did comment once that he wondered whether my filing cabinet would survive the next year because of the dents in the bottom drawer. But anyway, so that's kind of my work head. And,
Okay.
you know, I do loads of sailing and stuff, and I'm a devil in a boat and quite prepared to yell at people, but that's allowable, but it's not allowable at work.
Oh, good, good. Rachel Hill, thank you so much, Lucy. Loved hearing about your amazing journey. The picture of you in your guide uniform could have been me. Exact same Purdy haircut, and also I was also a Queen's guide.
Yay.
Nazira Karodia says, I enjoyed your talk, Lucy. What are you most proud of?
Oh, I'll tell you what I'm most proud of, apart from some of the work in environmental health and getting that programme off the ground. I'm most proud of what we did in Department of Applied Sciences, which when I inherited it has got I can't even say it, biological, biomedical and analytical sciences. The first thing we did was change the name. I'm most proud of what that department achieved. The KPIs glowed green consistently. We've got really enthusiastic people working there. We've got students who are going out on placement and doing summer internships with with researchers. That was one of the things I was most proud of, being head of that department.
Good. Claire Wilkinson, really interesting talk, Lucy, and you're certainly on my list of role models. Thank you for the invite. Krista Campbell, love the advice regarding sleeping on it, so true. Andy Ridgway, great talk, Lucy. Thank you for the invitation. Claire Graham, really enjoyed your journey, highlighting the personal and professional gains along the way. Really brought this to life in so many ways. Julie Walkling, I don't know that we know that person, but great presentation, Lucy. Always a delight to hear you speak and share your unique and honest perspective on things. Inspiring. Batman and Robin sends their regards. Milan says, Lucy, phenomenal journey you've been on. Thank you for the truly great and honest reflection. By the way, how did you get off that mountain?
Well, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, so it should have been light, and it wasn't, as you can see. That was one massive storm. And there's a bit of a photo on the top, shit, let's get off it. And there was an ice climb that was covered in snow. So that was the first bit. Then hit a glacier and couldn't find the way off because all the crevasses were covered in snow. And anyway, to cut long story short, had a bit of a 2 hours trying to keep out of the weather until a guide that was with us found a route down. Then it was a case of let's get off this mountain, let's get off it quick. So at one point I didn't think I was going to get off it because I started digging a hole thinking I was going to be there for 24 hours, but anyway we did get off it. But
right.
Yes, it did put me off for a couple of years, I have to say.
Yeah. Yes, and the stories that you're telling, your mum is listening there with a hand across her face thinking, oh my God, I didn't know that. Jenny Morton says, really interesting listening to you, thank you. Any advice you would give aspiring female leaders?
Yeah, I think the thing is to give it a go. So I realised quite early on that I only applied for jobs that I think I could do and do competently. I think sometimes to apply for jobs you think you can half do and then worry about it later. So I think the thing is be ambitious. You know, if you're not in it, you're not going to win it, and you're not going to win them all, certainly. I think my big turning point was the interim job as head of applied sciences, and it was David Veal that gave me the kick up the backside to do that, because he said to me, I think you can do it, and I said, well, I don't think I can, and he said, well, I'd rather you did it than someone else. So that kind of inspired me to apply for that. So I think the thing is about giving things a go.
Of course, lying behind that question is the importance of giving people confidence, particularly women, to be able to apply for it in the first place. You may have had that, but not everyone does, and we've still got work to do there. Heather McDonald, we miss you. Manuel Frutas Perez, excellent lecture, Lucy, such an interesting journey. Sue O'Neill, really enjoyable presentation, real and inspiring. Despite having worked closely with you, I've learned a lot. Good luck for the next phase of your career, not that you need it. Claire Flynn, terrors can be a point in time and then evolve as a strength and point of pride and success. Powerful. Sarah Maddock, thanks Lucy, your tips on learning and giving it a go are spot on. All the best, Sarah. And Julie Walkling, again, lovely to see you. Hope all is okay. Looking forward to when we can finally meet up again in person. That's all we have there at the moment, I think. Lucy, it's slightly after 5 o'clock. I'll just ramble for a moment and then there may be another question or two. Really exciting, I think, for anybody listening to you today to hear your journey, to see the success that you've had across a couple of decades working in higher education, almost 3, and the great knowledge, experience and capability that you brought to UWS. I know that I'm certainly delighted to have you here. As you said in your presentation, try before you buy, which you're becoming quite experienced at doing. And you did that here. You came along and you did an interim role. You got excited about what UWS was doing. We put you in a second interim role, and then you decided to apply for the big job, and you got it. And I have to say, from my perspective, and I know colleagues on the corridor at least are delighted to have you here. We'd love to have you here physically, but we'd love to have you on the team. And I think you are making a big impact already, and it's going to be a great journey ahead as we look to make more and important changes to what UWS looks like and the success the university can have in the coming years. So thank you for entrusting us to share your career, and I appreciate too how difficult that is when your family and your children live elsewhere, and you're travelling up and down, as you will be with EasyJet or other providers. from wherever you travel in either Bristol or Cardiff, I guess, up to Glasgow to be part of our time here. But we look forward to you coming back up, as you said, I think next month, or did you say the month after, whichever. I think that's probably enough. I am aware of a number of people who are on screen at the moment. We do have a Vice-Chancellor of another university on screen as well at the moment. Professor Chick Collins from the Faroe Islands University is here today. Chick, you're very welcome. I thought you may have asked a question, but nonetheless, delighted to have you and every other colleague from the university and from your career past, Lucy, who have joined us today. We think UWS is special, and we've got some special people here, and Lucy is certainly one of those people who I think is already making a significant difference and will make a more significant difference over the time that she spends with us. So to everybody who's joined us today, thank you so much for coming along and being part of this inaugural lecture. Coming up in the near future are two other executive colleagues of mine who will be giving talks. On Wednesday, the 21st of April, Professor Milan Raleigh-Chile is going to give his inaugural lecture at 4 o'clock, same time, on Wednesday, the 21st of April. And then on Wednesday, the 27th of April, Professor Jonathan Powles will be giving his inaugural lecture at 9:30 in the morning. And just to explain why it's 9:30 in the morning, Jonathan has been recruited from Australia. And so we're trying to enable people in 2 different time zones separated by 10 hours of difference the ability to join that lecture. Otherwise, if we did it at this time, they would be sound asleep and in their beds. So it's an early start for some of us, but for those in Australia who'll be joining, and they'll be in their hundreds, I'm sure, it'll be an evening lecture for them. So Lucy, thanks again for your inaugural lecture today, the insight into your career, your leadership development, and the things that you bring to UWS. And let me finish by saying, I was particularly excited about 2 things that you said. One was your interest in retirement and the importance of having an AVC early in your career, just so that you did have a parcel of money at the point of retirement. You're nowhere near that, and I'm not letting you go that quickly. But of particular importance was for me the importance that you give, as I do, to equality, diversity and inclusion. And for those of you that don't know, Lucy has recently been invited to take over the chairpersonship of that committee. And I look forward to working with you to ensure that UWS is as equal as it can be, as diverse as it can be, and as inclusive as it can be, regardless of protected characteristics and regardless of the background that people come from and whether they are a member of staff or a student at this university. So it's a very important concern for me, and I'm delighted that you share that importance about EDI in the same way that I do. Everybody, thanks very much. Take care. Safe travels home. Sorry you can't enjoy the wine, cheese and biscuits that we've got here, but you've probably got some in your own fridge, so go and enjoy them now. Thanks very much.
Thank you.